Hello, everyone. I hope you've been having a good conference so far. In this session, we're going to dive into how to build a just recovery. And before we do that, and before we hear from a really impressive array of talented leaders, I want to take just a couple minutes to provide some context on the resources that are flowing from the federal level, because these really provide a once-in-a-generation opportunity to address some of these underlying issues that made Latinos so vulnerable to the pandemic's devastation. My colleagues and I at the Raven Group have been tracking congressional efforts to get relief and recovery funds out to communities across the country. And we've been keeping a particular eye on how philanthropy can leverage these opportunities to get resources to the communities that need them most so that they have an equitable impact. So the first thing to keep in mind is that Congress has already enacted over $5.7 trillion in response to the pandemic so far. Hundreds of billions of those dollars remain to be spent, most of which have to be spent within the next 2 to 3 years. And now 2 major pieces of legislation are making their way through Congress to support the longer economic recovery. There's the infrastructure bill, which would provide $550 billion in new spending for physical transportation infrastructure, as well as water systems, environmental remediation, and expanding access to broadband. And then there's the recovery bill that's moving through the budget reconciliation process right now, literally right now, also known as the Build Back Better bill. This would invest up to $3.5 trillion in social, economic, and environmental programs over the next decade, with an emphasis on policies that really reduce the financial burdens that so many working families face, such as childcare, housing, healthcare. It would also invest billions in workforce development, in small businesses, in community revitalization. And if all goes well, it'll include immigration reforms that are going to provide a path to citizenship for millions of undocumented immigrant youth and essential workers. Now, together, these investments are at a scale that's comparable to the Great Society or New Deal. Now, the politics are going to be tricky, but if Congress succeeds in passing these bills in the coming weeks, we could see up to $4 trillion flowing to states, local governments, territories, tribes, nonprofits, small businesses, and families, all within the next 5 or 10 years. But to make sure that these resources translate into impact for the communities most in need, here's some things philanthropy can play a role in supporting. Inclusive program design, so that public programs are administered in a way that's linguistically and culturally competent. Inclusive project planning, that brings Latino voices to the table so that our communities are served rather than sidelined by new infrastructure investments. Inclusive workforce development policy so that Latino workers can move up the pay scale as new jobs are created. And support for small businesses so that they can benefit from new contracting opportunities. So to dive deeper on this road to a just recovery, I'm very pleased to yield the stage to Jorge Calderon, HIP's Managing Director for Impact Investments, and Isabella Casillas Guzman, the Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration.
Thank you, Michael, for your opening remarks to this plenary. My name is Jorge Calderon. I am the Managing Director of Impact Investments at HIP, where I lead our startup economy work, which includes our seed fund that invests in Latinx-led startups and our Latinx Launchpad pitch competition series. I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished guest today, SBA Administrator Isabella Casillas Guzman. On behalf of HIP, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being an incredible leader and role model for the Hispanic community.
Oh, thank you so much. That's kind. It's my pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So, Administrator, let me just start by saying that SBA has a very broad mandate around small business and entrepreneurship. And so with your permission, what I hope to do is first talk about some things around that span the SBA spectrum, and then narrow our conversation specifically around scalable startups and venture entrepreneurship segment. Does that sound all right?
That's great.
Fantastic. So you yourself have spent your career as a champion for diversity in small business and the innovation sector. I was wondering if you could characterize for us what is the state of diversity in entrepreneurship across the U.S. today?
Well, I think it's an incredible moment. Not only are all eyes on small businesses, but it's focused on equity and how we build back better under President Biden and Vice President Harris's leadership. We at the SBA have been laser focused on what is the face of entrepreneurship, and that's across our full spectrum from our main streets to manufacturing, the industrial base. They're so critical to our global competitiveness, as well as those innovative science and technology-based startups that we support. And we know that in terms of our diverse entrepreneurs, we've seen incredible growth. The statistics in terms of startups and diversity are really amazing. And Latinos in particular are starting businesses at such high rates. We at the SBA realize that in order for us to truly serve our customers and meet them where they are, we're going to have to pivot and adapt and be entrepreneurial. And so, with across our programs, whether it's access to capital or access to markets or just access to the networks and resources to learn how to be successful, we are transforming both the design and the implementation and outreach to consider the diverse entrepreneurs that are out there. And I think now more than ever, we have an opportunity to really build those bridges that need to be established with diverse entrepreneurs. Historically, there are barriers and challenges that have limited the navigation of government, and we need to try to overcome those barriers and make sure that we're serving all of our entrepreneurs. And President Biden says, great ideas come from everywhere and anywhere, and we need to make sure that we're helping entrepreneurship in order to strengthen our economy. And so I think, at this point, it's a really pivotal, unique moment to have this conversation and really focus on our diverse, people of color founded businesses.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And it's wonderful to hear how much you are progressing and being innovative in that approach and that and addressing those challenges. Are there specific areas, and you mentioned some of the programs or initiatives around capital and resources, are there specific areas of that are challenging for diverse entrepreneurs that you are double clicking on and really hyper focused on in supporting them?
Capital, always hands down, is such a critical area for us. But for me, it's also two-pronged, and I think about the revenue side of the equation just as much. I don't think there's a business out there that wouldn't tell you they want to grow their business. They rather have a contract versus a loan. So, I'm equally divided that those are both our extreme challenges. But during COVID, we really saw that access to relief, those funds to survive, were restricted in some communities, limited. And I think that above all, we've really tried to take an approach of looking at our relief programs, the billions in relief that we've been able to distribute, as well as the traditional SBA lending products and investment products, to make sure that we are able to truly reach all of our small businesses. So I think capital first and foremost. Obviously, we've been really laser focused on making sure that we can implement the American Rescue Plan and help our economy recover. With those were some laser focused programs on high impact industries like the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and the Shuttered Venues Operator Grant Program. But in addition, our COVID EIDL loans and grants that are still available, in which the SBA is positioning to make sure that those billions of dollars in relief get into the hands of our small businesses. So first and foremost, we're really focused on getting those funds out the door and positioning our capital products to really meet businesses where they are financially now post-COVID into the future. So looking at our 7A, our traditional loan products that we have available on our investment vehicles, as well as our non-dilutive funding, the grant programs that we help power at the federal level, to make sure that businesses have that capital to leverage the opportunities that we feel we are infusing in the economy through the bipartisan infrastructure deal and the Build Back Better agenda.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I was perusing the SBA site and trying to understand some more of the initiatives that you've started over the last year or so. Could you talk a little bit about the White House HBCU initiative? That seems to be something very new and exciting. And in addition to that, is there something specific for potentially Latinx community that's similar to that?
Mm-hmm. We've obviously, as a whole of government approach to ensuring racial equity, the government's been really focused on how we can partner better with institutions. I can speak personally more on the SBA side that we have been partnering across our programs with HBCUs as well as MSIs, so minority serving institutions, to make sure that we're reaching our diverse entrepreneurs or future entrepreneurs. About 20% of our resource partners are located at these MSIs across the country. And so that's exciting because we have direct, trusted local sources to connect to these businesses on the ground. Most recently, we launched more WBCs, our women's business centers, at HBCUs, and so we're continuing to try to look across our platforms to see how we can expand them and serve our entrepreneurs and future entrepreneurs at these minority serving institutions. And I think, broadly, this was something that was really important to the president and part of the American Rescue Plan, is that we know that we need to build better connections. Not every entrepreneur has that CPA or lawyer on speed dial, and that has really shown its effect in the relief and the access that we've seen during COVID. And so with the Community Navigator pilot program, we are trying to focus on making sure that underserved communities have local trusted networks and partners on the ground to provide information about the SBA and other federal resources or state and local resources or private. And so we are excited about the opportunity of building partnerships that can connect to the Latino community and other underserved entrepreneurs that don't traditionally have that trusted relationship already established with government.
That's great. And as you know, our audience is full of folks in the philanthropy world as well as the startup world. Are there specific types of partnerships that you would like to or have established with philanthropy, whether it's foundations or grant makers or other nonprofits, as well as kind of the startup sector and the startup ecosystem? How can we all be helpful in supporting some of these programs?
I think SBA is one of the greatest examples of public-private partnerships, and so many, critical players, both in philanthropy as well as the private sector broadly, have a big role in our ability to get capital into communities. I mean, philanthropy has really stepped up in its support, for example, of CDFIs and CDCs, so those community development financial institutions or community development corporations, those mission-based lenders who have really stepped up to support underserved communities, especially on small dollar loans. And so I know that philanthropy plays a big role in California. I saw it firsthand and tried to work in partnership to increase engagement in philanthropy in small business investment. They are oftentimes a really key pathway to building wealth in community and leading to further advancement of our underserved communities. And so I think that there's a big recognition of that across the philanthropic landscape, and especially with COVID, I think that's heightened. But even before that, we saw trends of increased interest in small business. So I think there's lots of opportunities to partner to make sure that we're getting affordable capital into the hands of businesses, because that's the critical missing link that they need to help grow their businesses. We don't want our diverse businesses or our rural businesses or veteran businesses to be limited by barriers to capital that they've been unable to access. And I think philanthropy plays a huge role in that. And not only in that, though, just in terms of best practices that come out of philanthropy. I think, the SBA manages this incredible resource partners, all these nonprofits out there, and philanthropy's really set the stage in terms of measuring impact. And I think that goes a long way with challenging our partners on the ground as well to make sure that they're measuring impact so that they need to pivot and adapt and better reach communities that are entrepreneurial, that they do so. And I love to take those partnerships with philanthropy to heart, because I think that they make us better in terms of our measuring and performance as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have a call to action to find ways to work together and to provide some of those best practices. And I'm not sure what is the best avenue to do that in terms of providing and communicating some of those best practices, but I can imagine a lot of folks, both at HIP and then our audience at large, have so many ideas around how to support entrepreneurs in general, Main Street to startups, et cetera. So our call to action is to help you, and then we can find ways to do that. So let me narrow our conversation, as I mentioned before, down to more of the what I would call the startup economy side of the SBA, and then with the kind of the Venn with our Latinx community. As I mentioned earlier, our startup economy wealth generation work at HIP, is guided by the belief that our Latinx community is not benefiting from the trillion-dollar startup economy, and we think that for the most part that's because we're mostly locked out and not being able to participate as much as we should be in that startup economy. I was wondering if you share that belief, if the research that you've seen also shares that belief, and what would you recommend for us to collectively work on to increase our participation in the startup economy, and then therefore we benefit from it in a much more equitable way?
It's such a critical, focus area. So glad that HIP is doing that. We know that 2/3 of net job creation is really thanks to a lot of our innovative startups or scalable startups, at the SBA. And so we have incredible programs to support them and want to be a voice to continue to support innovation amongst our entrepreneurs. I mean, I'll say it again, but the idea that ideas come from everywhere and anywhere is really what motivates me, because I know we need to solve global problems, and that comes from diverse thinking. And so we want to continue to support that. I think that SBA has some unique programs. Obviously, we help power the federal research dollars to small businesses through the SBIR, STTR program, Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And those are, non-dilutive funding. We call it America's Seed Fund because it truly can pave the way for ideas to be commercialized and grow into businesses. And we've done quite a bit of work in trying to increase outreach to underserved communities through that program. We literally go on a road tour trying to expand awareness of the SBIR program with all of the federal partners that contribute. And, I think that there's a great opportunity to partner to make sure that those connections to resources that exist are available to the Latino community as we look to develop those relationships. Beyond that, of course, though, in the investment side of it, I mean, there's eventually, even if you were to get SBIR funding, you still need to get additional funding to support your businesses. The SBA's small business investment companies are a great example of a private, public partnership again, where our mission is to increase access to patient capital to fund high growth small businesses that really drive the innovation economy and are responsible for that economic growth as job creation. And so with the SBIC program, of course, it's the largest lower middle market fund to fund, and so it's a lot of great leverage that we are able to achieve. There's $19 billion in private capital and $14.8 billion in SBA leverage. And the SBA really needs to be at the table more in trying to drive investments across our diverse entrepreneurs, that opportunity gap that everyone talks about, because we're not investing in our women and people of color at the same rates. I mean, I often reference the Morgan Stanley study with the $4.4 trillion opportunity gap, which is real. I mean, they're not able to achieve the revenues and the job creation levels of their peers, and that's due to that lack of investment, despite performance, which shows that we should be investing in them. So I do think that the SBIC program and the SBIR program can really be large voices to ensure that diversity is prioritized in the innovation space.
Yes, thank you for that. And I believe the Aspen Institute also came out with research saying that if we improve the system for entrepreneurs and funders in the Latinx community, that is a $1.4 trillion upside for the U.S. economy at large. So I know our time is dwindling down. I know you're very busy. So I just wanted to follow up on the SBIC program. Are there, because another belief we have is if we have more diverse fund managers, if we have more diverse investors, that also supports long-term diversity in terms of entrepreneurship and access to capital for our entrepreneurs. Does the SBIC program focus or have a focus on diverse fund managers, or are there other programs that you see as high potential for diverse managers?
Yeah. Well, as you know, President Biden signed the racial equity executive order on day one. I mean, we've taken a whole of government approach to ensuring racial equity, and that applies to all of our programs at the SBA. And so within the Biden-Harris administration, we are particularly focused on how we can better leverage our investment vehicles, the SBIC program, to partner with private markets to support this economic growth to under-resourced communities. We know that a lot of that means also supporting emerging fund managers. The SBIC program is ripe for some transformation, and we are looking at how we can partner with fund managers to invest across diverse industries, incentivize that growth, but also attract emerging managers in the process. And we're partnering with Congress to make sure that we have vehicles to better support diverse companies, as well as those diverse managers who invest in those companies at higher rates, to make sure that we can have an impact. I mean, if you look at some of the numbers in U.S. venture capital, I mean, from 2015 to 20, 2/3 of the dollars invested in U.S. venture capital has been allocated to impact strategies. That's up from 18% in the 5 years prior. And so there's a unique opportunity to really position us with venture capital in particular, and help more of our technology startups, our climate startups, those companies that are going to help us solve some of these global challenges that we're facing. The new generation of companies founded by diverse individuals, women, and rural and smaller communities, low-income communities around the country. So we do appreciate whatever partnerships we can develop to try to challenge us to reform our programs to make sure that we are supporting diverse managers, that we're creating the types of SBIC programs and licensing opportunities to invest in venture and startups. And that we can support, both an ecosystem that develops these managers as well as provides technical assistance in the process.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, Administrator. I know our time has concluded. I wanted to really just thank you for such an insightful conversation. It's very thoughtful of you to spend your time with us. I think I've learned quite a bit of new things around SBA and all the things they're doing for entrepreneurship, and the leadership that you and President Biden are continuing to do to create more equity within our economy. I wish you the best of continued success, and keep us posted on how we as philanthropists and as startup innovators can continue to partner with you to make progress.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Administrator.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So I am very pleased to be back with you, and particularly to be able to help moderate some Q&A here with a very talented leader, Mark Madrid, who is the Associate Administrator in the Office for Entrepreneurial Development at the Small Business Administration. Mark, welcome.
It's an honor to be here. I say it all the time. The greatest honor of my life to serve entrepreneurs across the United States. My dad was an entrepreneur. He opened his welding business back in the Texas Panhandle. So he migrated from the cotton fields to owning his own business, which was a dream and aspiration. Unfortunately, I lost my dad to COVID-19 back in the summer of 2020. I almost lost my mother, and my sister was positive. So it was a very difficult experience. So I dedicate this time at the SBA to serve small business owners to him, frankly.
Thanks. My condolences for your loss, Mark. That's one of the toughest losses. And thank you again, though, for joining us. Now, we've got a bunch of questions that are coming in through the chat. And folks, please feel free to continue to post questions. I have a few of my own I'm hoping to get to, but let's start with the chat. So Mark, given your role leading the Office for Entrepreneurial Development, are there any new or growing resources that you're leading to support the unique nature of scalable startups?
Oh, I love that question, and thank you for providing it. First of all, I'm just overwhelmingly excited that Administrator Guzman was part of this HIP conference, and so I just want to thank the leadership here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And so Administrator Guzman talks about innovative startups all the time. I mean, right along the way that she talks about the pillars of building a more customer-centric SBA to be more technology forward and to advance equity. So we are breaking silos in terms of my other fellow leaders who lead different units of the SBA, including the Office of Investment and Innovation, OII. So I hope I don't overburden you with acronyms, but the Office of Innovation and Investment. So we will be looking at working with that particular unit. And also with us, we're so lucky and fortunate, and we take this as a big responsibility, that the Office of Entrepreneurial Development is launching the Community Navigator pilot. It's a $100 million granting opportunity that was enacted through the American Rescue Act of 2021. And so part of that is matriculation of entrepreneurs to be more resourceful in terms of things that we can provide here, including education. So we will be looking at that through OED, the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, and also at the Office of Investment and Innovation. I use repeat messaging by design because I want to have more folks navigate the large website, sba.gov, into these other territories, because it will be very beneficial, including to this person who asked about startups, which is very important to the Latinx community, Latinos and Latinas across the country who are creating jobs and starting these businesses at a faster tick than any other segment.
Great. And I do have to say, hats off to you and your colleagues, Mark. I feel like, having spent a lot of time on government websites, I feel like SBA's got one of the most user-friendly, kind of clear, easy to navigate websites in the federal government. So, so the next question we had from the audience was how the outcome of the census, which really documented the visible growth of our Latinx demographic, how is that going to influence where and what services the SBA is providing?
Well, I can tell you from personal experience in the team at OED, the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, with the Community Navigator pilot, we have to ensure geographic diversity. And that's the pledge that we made, and we're going to deliver on that pledge. Also, the census information, we parallel that with research coming out of the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative that states, and the fact is the fact, that Latino and Latina entrepreneurs are outpacing everyone else by a tick of 34% versus 1% in terms of new business formations. So that definitely has to drive our decisioning on where we plant resources, especially the ones coming from the Community Navigator pilot program. And when I say pilot, it's very important because our imagine statement down the road is that the lessons that we learn from the Community Navigators are exponentially institutionalized. And whether that means further funding, public-private partnerships. And when I say navigators, we're talking about a hub and spoke model. And the one that comes to mind is the Promotora network. That's exactly what we're trying to do. During the pandemic, we saw places like the El Paso Women's Border Center, who is one of our women's business centers. They were literally, back in about April or May of 2020, flashback, if you will, during that time, they were going down these wonderful, warriors down the streets of El Paso, down shopping strips with, rolling carts, plexiglass. They were providing broadband access. They had mobile printers. They were providing support to these business owners. That's what we're talking about in terms of longevity and survival and recovery. That's the concept that we want to underscore and scale. It's a hyper-local approach, meeting small businesses where they are, including Latino and Latina entrepreneurs. And the way we're going to do that is through the community champions that know them, which includes translators, which includes tax pros. At the end of the day, over 90% of our Latino and Latina entrepreneurs are non-employer firms, meaning that it's me, myself, and I, solo entrepreneurs. But we want them to have a vision to scale, but first they've got to grow. They've got to think about expanding their workforce and getting that additional employee. They want to think, and cases where it applies to certification procurement. Procurement means opportunities, and certification means if you're in an eligible industry to be able to diversify your portfolio, if you will. So we're looking at all of that right now, and I can't think of a better leader to be in the trenches with than our fearless leader, Administrator Guzman, and all the dedicated warriors here at the SBA. So I appreciate your question. I hope that brings more color to what we're trying to do on the ground, especially for our Latino and Latina entrepreneurs.
Great. And thanks for sharing your vision, Mark, as well around the Community Navigators pilot. I just know through my day-to-day work that there are folks around the country who are looking towards that, as this tremendous opportunity to really support, businesses owned by people of color and really bring transformational economic development to communities of color across the country. So glad to hear your enthusiasm and dedication to that. It certainly helps to build the confidence in it and excitement for it. We have another question here from someone who's clearly done their homework, interested in knowing what learnings you're going to bring from the Latino Business Action Network, as well as your time at SLAY, the Stanford Latino, see if I got this right, Entrepreneurs Institute.
Close. I mean, that's close enough. Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. You nailed it. So thank you for the opportunity. But you know what? It really goes. A big part of my heart is that LBAN, the Latino Business Action Network, and SLAY, the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. But it goes beyond that, because when I had to shut down a bank at the height of the Great Recession, when I was one rung short of my childhood dream, which was not to be president or an astronaut, it was to be a president of a bank. And I had to shut a satellite bank down. And then I pivoted, and I wanted to do something impactful that benefited the Latino and Latina community. So I started selling small business memberships at the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in Houston, Texas. And then I graduated to CEO of the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And then the great opportunity at LBAN, collaborating with Stanford. And what I learned is, if you're leading organizations like that, you have to remember who you're serving. You have to remember the grit and ganas and resilience of our Latino entrepreneurs. The only way to do that is not to get so far up in the air. We call it fighting a ground war, not an air war, meaning that you know every ounce of the terrain. So I've always been mesmerized at the resourcefulness of our Latino and Latina entrepreneurs. I always ask them, why are you making that type of tie? Why that color? Or why is there caution tape on your bathroom? What happened here? Why are you serving the food, cashing people up and cooking the food? Or how did you secure Mark Cuban funding and being a vegan dog food manufacturer? So all those lessons I learned, and then there was the research component that I had always been salivating for, provided by Stanford. And so it's the most comprehensive research on Latino and Latina business owners in the country. And so it's the power of data while not forgetting who we're serving and meeting them where they are. And it's three things, being an elephant, not a hippo, meaning an elephant has big ears, hippo has small ears. So you got to listen, you got to empathize, and you got to solve. And so that's what we're going to do here. Once again, Administrator Guzman is a leader that walks the talk. So we're here to do a job, and we're going to do it. It's a big challenge, but we're up to the challenge.
That's fantastic. What a great note to end on. I can't believe our time has just flown by, Mark Madrid. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and answering some of our audience members' questions. With that, I am very pleased to turn it over to our next moderator, Jerry Maldonado, who is going to lead us in a really, what I think is going to be captivating conversation and engaging conversation. So to Jerry Maldonado, I turn it to you.
Buenas tardes, mi gente. So excited to join you all from New York in this virtual fireside chat with two incredibly dynamic state and federal public sector leaders. We have Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez and Deputy Secretary Adrian Todman, who are joining us this afternoon. So I'll start by introducing Secretary Castro. As many of you know, in California, Lourdes currently serves as California's Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, the Secretary of the Housing Agency. In this role, she oversees 11 entities that are responsible for expanding affordable housing, developing comprehensive solutions to ending homelessness, and regulating banking and financial services, and strengthening consumer protections. She's been actively engaged in the state's COVID-19 response and recovery, serving on the governor's Business and Jobs Task Force, and has held many prominent positions, both at the local, state, and federal level, including leading HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing under President Obama, and serving in multiple roles in many cities, including President and CEO of the San Antonio Housing Authority, Director at the LA City Housing Authority, and most recently serving as President of the University Health System. So welcoming Lourdes this afternoon, wrong time zones. And I'm also incredibly thrilled to introduce Adrian Todman, who currently serves as Deputy Secretary at HUD, working to advance the administration's really ambitious housing community development goals. Deputy Secretary Todman has had an extensive career in housing community development, holding several positions at HUD, working in a broad range of issues, from the redevelopment of distressed public housing to advancing public policy innovation. Before joining HUD most recently, she served as the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, where she worked to advance a whole set of innovative national funding policies to preserve and develop affordable housing. And closer to the ground, she served as director of the District of Columbia's Housing Authority, where she implemented a national award-winning model to house veterans experiencing homelessness and helped increase home ownership opportunities by 50% for low and moderate income families. And last but not least, I will say that the Deputy Secretary, as I know, is also born and raised in the U.S. Virgin Islands, yes? Yes. And so she is a fellow Caribeña. So welcome, Deputy Secretary and Secretary, to this conversation. So Adrian and Lourdes, I am really looking forward to just being in conversation with you all this afternoon and really exploring a little bit more deeply about how we might forge the kinds of public, philanthropic, community partnerships they're going to lead to the kinds of structural changes that we just heard earlier are really necessary in order to seize this moment. And so I'm going to start by just, taking a log and throwing that log on the fire so we get some of the embers going. I'm going to start with a little bit of a meaty question here, right? And it's a small question, a question around really the relationship between race and recovery, right? As we all heard earlier, natural disasters, whether they're climate or health related, disproportionately impact BIPOC communities. We've seen this over and over again, right? From Hurricane Maria to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen the way in which they reinforce these pre-existing inequalities, right? Further marginalizing Latinx, Black and Brown, and immigrant communities. So I'd like to start with asking you both this question, and maybe I'll start with Adrian. Really would love to get your perspectives from your vantage point about what you see as the role of the federal and state government in addressing structural racism as part of long-term disaster recovery. Adrian, I'll start with you.
Thank you. And I hope everybody can hear me okay. And let me just begin by saying hello to my sister Lourdes. We have known each other for many years, and we are daughters from another mother. And I consider her not to be just a colleague, but one of my best friends. So it's an honor to serve on this panel, this fireside chat with her. But to get to the question you've raised, one of the reasons that I was so excited about joining this administration is the intentionality that this president and our secretary places on issues like how climate change and extreme weathers are really impacting people of color, particularly Latinos and Latinas. We know that about Latinos and Latinas are 50% more likely to live in coastal areas that are impacted by extreme weather occurrences. We only have to look at the past couple of weeks to see what Hurricane Ida did, stretching from all the way to Louisiana to New York and New Jersey. And the one thing that the secretary has said to me, Secretary Fudge has said to me, she said, Adrian, it is important that we are there for the people. Like the people don't know the difference between HUD and FEMA and all these three-letter agencies here in DC. They only know when people are showing up, and when they're authentic and when they want to help. And so I know that the president is very, very focused on making sure that climate change and the resources that we here at HUD have and other agencies is really being put to work in terms of some of the resources we need to have and sent out efficiently. We saw the president go down to Louisiana. We saw him head north. He's now in California. He is really, really walking the talk and very firm about making sure that the federal government is playing a role in equitable distribution of disaster recovery resources, and that we get it right. The bipartisan infrastructure bill has about $50 billion in climate resilience funding embedded in it. And many of you have now seen, maybe you've seen the language from the Build Back Better reconciliation. And, the president really has been clear all along that it's important to have bipartisanship, but it's really important for us to get this right, this historic moment right, and that moment has to be infused with equity for people of color and for Latinos and Latinas.
Thank you, Adrian. Lourdes.
Yes, thank you. Of course, it's great to be here. Great to be with mi hermana, Adrian Todman, and congratulations again on the appointment to serve as Deputy Secretary at HUD. And Jerry, it's so good to see you again. I mentioned to Jerry that the last time I saw him was probably 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I would say, in New York, where we were having a conversation about public housing and reimagining public housing. And so just to go straight to the question that Jerry asked both Adrian and I, similar to what Adrian has shared with regard to leadership and really setting the agenda, leadership mattering, right? And setting a very, very much an agenda of committing to ensuring that everything that we do is with a commitment and a lens towards equity. This is exactly what is happening within the state of California. I had a couple of days to get sort of acquainted before we jump right into this pandemic response mode. I started this job on March 2nd of 2020. 2 days later, the governor declared a state of emergency given the overall information that we had about how devastating this coronavirus is going to be. And frankly, as we moved into a response mode, as we moved into developing an overall response system, what I very much appreciated about this administration, about the governor, and about my colleagues leading various agencies was our commitment to ensure that those communities, individuals that we know were already having a hard time prior to the pandemic, that we were centering our efforts around communities most impacted. And so I think to your question, Jerry, from my vantage point, what are the level of investments, that we can make as state, government, and how do we address structural racism? I think that the way we do that is by ensuring that our efforts are centered around individuals that are most impacted. And I think when we do that, we acknowledge that there's going to be a disproportionate impact when it comes to any type of disaster or crisis. And that's exactly what California has done. And that, I think, has led to a very different response system, one that acknowledges that there's a history of uneven investment across communities, and one that is setting a new marker for how we need to respond. And that truly, from my perspective, has given way to developing new ways of working together with the federal government, new ways of working together with local government. It's given way to innovation. The state launched a very innovative approach to housing individuals experiencing homelessness from Project Room Key, where we were able to help locals basically move into temporary hotels and motels to protect them against COVID-19. To then the second, iteration of Project Room Key, which is the Home Key program, where we were able, as a state, to deploy $846 million to local communities, 51 jurisdictions across the state, to acquire hotels, motels, and distressed properties and convert them into permanent housing for individuals experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. And so that's, for me, that's an example, right? When you start from recognizing the disproportionate impact that disasters or public health crisis brings on low-income communities, on communities of color, on the Latino, community, I think it really changes the way that we act, the way that we collaborate, and the way that we implement.
So that is incredibly powerful, right? This idea of like who you center, right? When you're addressing these systemic challenges and how they change, right? Kind of how you design public policy to really address these underlying drivers. And Adrian, you said, it's really important that in this moment we get the job done. And we heard earlier, right, that there are these significant resources. These are kind of historic, kind of once in a lifetime set of resources that might allow us, right, to get at some of these underlying drivers. But that also requires a different way of working, right? A different way of the federal government partnering with states and localities to make sure that these resources move in a certain way. I'd love to get both your reflections on like what kinds of partnerships, like what would it take? What do we need to do differently, right? In those kinds of federal, state, kind of municipal partnerships to make sure that we're unlocking the full potential of these resources.
I'm happy to start. I think that it's important at the federal government level that we are listening to the voices of the people who are most impacted, and we are listening to those organizations that are serving those populations. It's every now and then somebody will say to me, I'm here to represent so and so because they don't have a voice. And I said, no, they actually have a voice. We all have a voice. The question is, are you welcoming these voices to the table? And I know that both the Secretary and I feel very, very confidently that we want to make sure that when we are coming up with program design, there's a lot of historic work that's happening here in DC I'm very proud of. But if we don't have a program design that really does what Lourdes has suggested, centers the end user, like who's going to have access to these funds, who are we hoping to drive our home ownership, whose home ownership rates are we trying to drive up? And the one thing that we have been doing is doing exactly that, just centering who are we trying to help as much as we can. And that's one of the reasons why here at HUD we have looked at some of the variables around the difficulties and barriers that people have to enter home ownership, things like student debt. I was a first gen. I'm the first in my generation, first in my household to have gone to college. My parents couldn't afford the college that I went to, so I took out loans. And so, it's taken some time to get rid of those loans. But in a situation where there's so many more people of color who are burdened with student debt, imagine trying to do that and take on the burden of a mortgage. So one of the things that we have done is that we're making it easier. We're making it easier than underwriting for individuals and for households who have student debt to be able to qualify and get access to a loan. We also know that unfortunately, appraisers will look at a white household's home and a black and brown household's home and appraise them differently. It makes no sense. And so we recognize that that's happening in our system, and we have decided to do something about it. And the Secretary is co-chairing a task force to really dive deep into those issues and be able to make change there. So I think we have to look at what's happening locally, listening to what people are saying to us, and then as a federal government apparatus, create change.
Right. Just sort of building on Adrian's points, and to your question also, Jerry, about these new ways of working together and the partnerships, right? I'd like to share with you sort of a very concrete example of how the state is working very differently with nonprofit organizations, and frankly, this is in response to the partnership that we have with the federal government. So at the federal level, through Treasury, the state has received $5.2 billion in rental assistance. This has never been done before. This is historic, and not just in California, of course, across the U.S. And so to stand up a rental assistance program to help renters and landlords that were impacted by COVID-19. And then just, side note, we know that the majority of renters are people of color. In California, the 75%, 3 out of every 4 renter is a person of color. So again, centering sort of in understanding who we're serving. So the state had to very quickly develop a rental assistance program to help renters stay housed, to pay back arrears to landlords and help landlords meet their mortgage. And as part of the program that we developed, we entered into a partnership with well over 130 nonprofit organizations that are trusted organizations on the ground that frankly have a better relationship with their local sort of community than the state. And not because the state we don't have a relationship, but these are the people that are in their neighborhood, right? And so they have been instrumental. They have been really the bridge between that household that is struggling to stay housed and this resource that the state is administering. So the relationship that we have with these nonprofit organizations has been really crucial in the success of our rental assistance program, which, by the way, today we hit the $1 billion mark in terms of total dollars obligated to families that have been qualified. So they've been managed. Thank you. And then $530 million paid out to landlords on behalf of renters that have been eligible. But the point about also the relationship and the partnership and the responsibility that we have is at some point, these dollars are going to go away. And these organizations that are already tapped out are going to begin to maybe struggle financially because they've had to expand to respond. Example, last week, 2 weeks ago, I was in South LA meeting with a nonprofit organization called Trust South LA. The executive director shared with me that a year ago, their budget was $700,000. Today, because of the funding that's coming from the state and other local efforts, their budget is $2.1 million. And it's incredible growth in 1 year. And they've been able to hire people from the community to help, be the bridge. However, at some point, those resources are going to diminish. And then what? And so I think that when we honor that relationship and that new partnership that we've established with these nonprofit organizations, we also have to ensure that we are finding a way to sustain their work and effort. And frankly, I think this is where philanthropy plays a very key role, recognizing the capacity that has been shown by these nonprofit community development groups and helping to bridge, right, and helping to support the efforts.
And this actually pivots to a few questions that are actually surfacing from the audience that I'd love to kind of pivot to in the time that we have together. Because one is a question about really how we sustain this change, to your point, Lourdes, right? These opportunities are moments where we can create lasting infrastructure if we build the right kinds of community partnerships and strengthen those organizations on the ground who are closest to the folks and the challenges, right? So a question for both of you, really would love to hear how you think about the roles that philanthropy can play right? And strengthening the kinds of capacities to address some of these longstanding kind of housing and development challenges. So I'll start with there for both of you.
Yeah. So, we have this historic opportunity in housing and community resources. And one of the things that we are struggling with is making sure that our localities are ready for the largesse that is hopefully coming their way. And what I have seen in my experience is that philanthropic organizations have played a critical role in two areas. One, we mentioned it here, capacity building, making sure that the local nonprofits and even larger nonprofits who are probably going to have to scale up are able to do so and have the training and capacity they need to not just accept funds, but also use the funds in a way that is most beneficial and effective and able to drive outcomes. The second is also kickstarting new ideas. I mean, the government, we're not necessarily known for innovation. And I think what I have found is that locally and statewide, philanthropic organizations will extend their funding to test new ideas and to see what works. And when we do that, we can find really interesting ways to create some of the outcomes and some of the partnerships that we're talking about here. I can't say enough for the work that our philanthropic partners do. They sit inside of those spaces that government cannot, and they sit inside of spaces and stay with communities when sometimes government is not always there and we are catching up. So we see here at HUD the philanthropic community as being very near and dear to our mission. In fact, your very own Anna Marie was the leader who created one of the first philanthropic organizations and offices inside of a federal government agency. So we are here and our staff is here and looking forward to working with many of you here to make sure that this historic moment is used in the right way.
Thank you, Adrian.
Great. Yeah, I would just say I agree. I agree with everything that Adrian has said. Philanthropy plays a very key role. In the case of the Home Key program that I shared about earlier, where we were able to deploy 846 million, 46 million of that was philanthropic donations, dollars that came in from funders to support grantees with operating subsidy, with rental, with resident services, with getting the project, into to be stabilized, right? And so very much a partnership. Our office, the Governor's Office of Social Innovation, has been cultivating and developing those relationships with philanthropy. We have a working group called the Housing and Homelessness Working Group, where we meet with philanthropic leaders once every other month to take a deep dive into some of the innovative work that the state is doing, but also, to help introduce and facilitate relationships with some of our local grantees. So for Hispanics and philanthropy, what you do is critically important. And if you'd like to support the work of California and the work that we're doing in the state, we do have an Office of Social Innovation that is ready to work with you and to connect, to continue to leverage our collective investments.
Daughters and ages, what I'm hearing loud and clear is that this is an opportunity that we must seize, right? To really lay the foundation for the kind of change we've been waiting for, to institutionalize it and to do it in a way that really lifts and centers the communities we all serve. I gotta say, I feel like throwing another ember in the fire and having a glass of wine, but I'm being ushered. I will tell you, thank you so much, Lourdes and Adrian, for just whetting our appetites. And we're looking forward to more conversation and deeper partnership in the years to come. Thank you, all our friends in HIP, Ana Mari, all of our friends, and we will see you after this break. Thanks.